It was a rainy Wednesday evening when my life changed forever. I had been working late at my law office in downtown Seattle, buried in a mountain of paperwork for a high-profile embezzlement case. As the storm raged outside, thunder rumbling like a distant threat, I finally decided to call it a night. Pulling on my trench coat and grabbing my briefcase, I hurried down to the parking garage, the fluorescent lights flickering ominously above. That's when I saw it. A silver sedan was parked in my usual spot, its windows fogged up and the engine idling. It wasn't unusual for cars to take up random spots in the garage, but something about this one felt off. Maybe it was the way the headlights seemed to flicker, or the faint, almost imperceptible hum emanating from the vehicle. Ignoring the unease creeping up my spine, I walked toward my car a few rows over. As I passed the sedan, I caught a glimpse of something or someone through the fogged-up window. A pale face, motionless, staring straight ahead. I froze. Knocking on the window wasn't an option. My gut screamed at me not to draw attention to myself. Instead, I crouched behind a concrete column and fumbled for my phone. I debated calling 911 but hesitated. What would I say? A parked car in a public garage with someone inside wasn't exactly a crime. Then the window rolled down. The face I'd seen wasn't pale at all, it was masked. A smooth, featureless mask like something out of a horror movie. The person tilted their head slightly as if they sensed me watching and raised a single gloved hand, pointing directly at me. My blood turned to ice. I bolted for my car, fumbling with my keys as panic set in. The sound of the silver sedan's engine revving behind me spurred me on, and I barely managed to slam my car door shut before it sped past. For a moment I thought it was over, just a bizarre, random encounter. But as I pulled out of the garage and merged onto the highway, I saw the silver sedan again, its headlights bearing down on me like a predator. I drove aimlessly through the city, taking sharp turns and doubling back in an attempt to lose them. It didn't work. The sedan stayed close, always just far enough behind to keep me in sight. My mind raced. Could this be connected to the embezzlement case? Had I stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to? Eventually, I ended up in a deserted stretch of road near the docks, the rain pouring so hard it felt like the heavens were collapsing. I parked my car under a broken streetlight, heart hammering in my chest. The silver sedan slowed to a stop 100 feet away. Neither of us moved. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain on metal. Then, without warning, the sedan's passenger door opened. A figure stepped out, clad in a black trench coat and holding something in their hand. A briefcase, just like mine. My breath hitched. The person approached my car slowly, deliberately, stopping just outside the cone of light cast by the street lamp. They placed the briefcase on the ground, turned, and walked back to the sedan. Moments later, the car roared to life and sped off into the night. I sat frozen, staring at the briefcase through the rain-blurred windshield. Every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone, but curiosity won out. Against my better judgment, I stepped out of the car and picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded neatly on top of a stack of what looked like cash. But it wasn't the money that caught my attention. It was the words scrawled in red ink on the paper. "We know what you did. This is just the beginning." I felt the ground shift beneath me as the weight of the message sank in. I hadn't done anything, or had I? The drive back to my apartment was a blur. My hands trembled on the wheel and my mind reeled with questions. Who were they? What did they think I had done? And why leave a briefcase full of cash? It felt like a trap, a meticulously designed web I couldn't see but was already caught in. When I finally stepped into my apartment, the stale air felt suffocating. I locked the door behind me, sliding the deadbolt into place with a decisive clunk, and dropped the briefcase on the coffee table. The storm outside had followed me home, lightning illuminating the room in jagged bursts. I reached for the paper again, hoping I'd missed some clue in my initial panic. The ink was thick and smeared slightly in places, as though whoever wrote it had pressed the pen too hard. We know what you did. This is just the beginning." But I hadn't done anything, or at least nothing worth this kind of attention, right? I thought back to the embezzlement case. My client, Stephen Hargrove, was a slippery executive accused of siphoning millions from his own company. The evidence against him was damning, but Hargrove had insisted on his innocence, claiming he was framed. I didn't believe him. Clients lie all the time, but the paycheck was too good to pass up. Had I stumbled onto something while digging through the case files? Something that put a target on my back? I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the room as the storm roared outside. The rational thing to do would be to call the police, but then what? Hand over the briefcase and tell them a masked stranger in a silver sedan had dropped it off? I'd sound like a lunatic. Worse, I couldn't shake the feeling that involving the cops would escalate things. Whoever they were, they wanted me scared and alone. My phone buzzed, shattering the silence. I lunged for it, nearly dropping the device in my rush. The caller ID was blocked. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" There was no response, just the faint sound of breathing on the other end. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice cracking. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my pulse pounding in my ears. This was no random prank. They were watching me, listening, waiting for me to make the next move. Desperate for answers, I opened the briefcase again and started rifling through the stack of cash. It looked real enough, crisp $100 bills in neatly bundled stacks. But as I sifted through it, I felt something odd. The bottom layer wasn't cash at all. It was a manila folder. Inside were photos, dozens of them, and they were all of me. Walking into my office, sitting at my desk, grabbing coffee at my favorite corner shop. The most chilling photo was the last one, me crouched behind the column in the parking garage, staring at the silver sedan. I dropped the photos as though they'd burned me. My knees felt weak and I sank onto the couch, my head spinning. This wasn't just surveillance, this was a full-blown threat. But why? What did they want from me? Before I could piece together an answer, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message. "Check your back pocket." My stomach flipped. Slowly I reached behind me, my fingers trembling as they brushed against a folded piece of paper. I didn't remember putting anything in my pocket. The note was short, written in the same red ink as the one in the briefcase. "Don't trust her." Her? Who the hell was her? A sickening realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My assistant, Rachel, had been unusually insistent about the Hargrove case. She'd pushed me to take it, even when I hesitated. She'd been the one combing through the files and passing them along. Could she be involved? Or was this note meant to throw me off? I didn't know who to trust anymore. All I knew was that I was in way over my head, and the storm outside was nothing compared to the one I was about to face. I barely slept that night. Every sound in the dark felt threatening. Every flicker of light outside my window made my heart race. I sat in my armchair, clutching my phone, the open briefcase with its ominous contents sitting on the table in front of me. Who was watching me? And why the warning, "Don't trust her"? By dawn, I had made up my mind to act. Checking into Rachel, my assistant, seemed like the logical first step. She was sharp, resourceful, and good at her job, though her persistence often bordered on pushy. Could she really be involved in something like this? I decided to find out. I arrived at the office before anyone else that morning. A full 30 minutes before opening, I let myself into Rachel's small office and began looking around. Her desk was meticulously organized just as I expected, but in the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a stack of mundane documents, I found something that made my breath catch. A flash drive. There was no label on it, no indication of its purpose. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my laptop. What I saw sent a shiver down my spine. Emails from someone using the alias Morena, discussing evidence and operation coordination. Photos of Hargrove, taken inside his home, his office, even his private yacht. A document labeled Phase 2 Initiation. It was a detailed outline of what appeared to be a setup. The plan revolved around pinning additional charges on Hargrove to escalate his legal troubles and secure a conviction regardless of actual guilt. It mentioned unnamed outside assets and their roles, and my name appeared multiple times in the notes. Ensure compliance, Chambers, lawyer. Compliance? I wasn't even aware of this conspiracy, yet it was clear that someone had been planning to use me as a pawn all along. I closed the laptop, my heart racing. Rachel's involvement seemed undeniable, but I still didn't understand the motive or why I was suddenly in danger. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door unlocking. I quickly returned everything to its place and hurried to my own office, pretending nothing had happened. Minutes later, Rachel walked in. She greeted me with her usual cheery smile, holding 2 coffees. "Morning, I figured you'd need this after last night's storm," she said, placing 1 cup on my desk. I thanked her, forcing a smile, but my mind was racing. Did she know I'd found the flash drive? Was she already suspicious of me? I studied her movements carefully, trying to catch any sign of guilt or nervousness, but she seemed as calm and professional as ever. "By the way," she added casually, "I've been digging into some extra research for the Hargrove case. I'll have a file for you by the end of the day. There's something big I think we can use." Her words hit me like a gut punch. Was she feeding me more bait, hoping to entangle me further? Or was this part of some larger game I still didn't fully understand? For the rest of the day, I played along, pretending everything was normal. But as soon as I got home, I opened the briefcase again. This time, I scrutinized every detail, looking for anything I might have missed. That's when I noticed a faint indentation on the inside of the case lid. It looked like writing, backward, as if someone had pressed a note against the leather. I grabbed a pencil and lightly shaded over the marks, revealing a scrawled message. "Follow the money. The docks. Midnight." I stared at the words, my pulse quickening. It was a lead, one I couldn't ignore, but it also felt like walking into a trap. As midnight approached, I found myself sitting in my car near the docks, the briefcase on the passenger seat. The area was desolate, save for the occasional sound of waves slapping against the piers. I waited, my nerves on edge, until I saw it. A faint figure stepping out from the shadows. It wasn't Rachel. It wasn't anyone I recognized. But they were holding something familiar, another briefcase. The figure emerged from the shadows slowly, each step deliberate, as if they knew I was watching. The street lamp near the dock barely illuminated their face, but I could make out the faint glint of glasses and the sharp edge of their jawline. They stopped about 20 feet from my car and set the briefcase on the ground, just like before. I got out of my car, the night air damp and heavy with salt. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. They just stood there, hands clasped in front of them, watching. I approached cautiously, my own briefcase in hand, every muscle in my body tensed for whatever might happen next. "Who are you?" I demanded, stopping a safe distance away. "What do you want from me?" The figure tilted their head slightly as if amused. Then, in a low voice that sent chills down my spine, they said, "We're not here to harm you, Mr. Chambers. Not yet." "Not yet?" My voice cracked. "What is this? Why are you following me?" The figure gestured to the briefcase I was holding. "You've been chosen to deliver something. Think of it as your initiation." I glanced down at the briefcase in my hand, my grip tightening around the handle. "Initiation into what? I didn't sign up for anything." The figure chuckled, a sound that felt colder than the wind cutting through the dock. "Not everything requires your consent. Sometimes you're simply useful." Anger bubbled beneath my fear. "If this has anything to do with the Hargrove case—" "It's bigger than Hargrove," the figure interrupted sharply. "Much bigger. He's a pawn just like you." The cryptic response made my head spin. I opened my mouth to demand answers, but the figure held up a hand. "There's no time for that. Midnight tomorrow, same place. Bring what's in the briefcase." They turned and began walking away before I could protest. I stood frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Finally, I worked up the nerve to shout, "What if I don't?" The figure stopped, their silhouette sharp against the faint glow of the street lamp. "If you don't, they said without turning around. "We'll make sure the world believes you're guilty of everything we've done." And with that, they disappeared into the darkness. Back in my apartment, I finally opened the new briefcase. Inside, there was no cash this time, only a USB drive and another note. This one was different. The writing was clean and formal, as if typed by a machine. "Access the drive. You'll find what you need to keep yourself alive." I inserted the USB into my laptop, half expecting it to fry the machine or install malware. Instead, a folder opened, revealing a series of encrypted files and a single video. Hesitant but curious, I clicked on the video. It showed a man I didn't recognize, a middle-aged executive type, sitting in what looked like a hotel room. His voice trembled as he spoke directly into the camera. "If you're seeing this, then they've chosen you," he said, his eyes darting nervously. "I don't know who you are, but trust me, you don't want to fight them. Do what they say, and maybe, just maybe, you'll survive." The video cut off abruptly, leaving me staring at the blank screen. My pulse raced as the reality of my situation sunk in. Whoever these people were, they had the power to destroy lives, and they had decided mine was next on the line. But why? What was in this new briefcase that I had to deliver, and to whom? I didn't know the answers yet, but one thing was certain. I was no longer just a lawyer caught in a web of intrigue. I was a player in a game far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. The next day passed in a haze of paranoia and dread. Every phone call, every knock at the door felt like a prelude to disaster. I had no appetite, no focus. My mind was consumed by the growing weight of the unknown. Rachel was unusually quiet at the office, barely making eye contact. I couldn't tell if she was avoiding me or if she was just busy, but her silence only added to my unease. By late afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I excused myself early, claiming a headache, and drove home to prepare for the midnight rendezvous. The briefcase sat on my kitchen counter like a loaded gun, its secrets weighing heavier with each passing hour. I still didn't know what was inside, beyond the encrypted files and the ominous video. I had tried opening some of the other files on the USB earlier, but they were locked behind a password I couldn't crack. As the clock ticked toward midnight, I packed the briefcase and slipped a small voice recorder into my pocket. If this meeting was a setup, I wanted some kind of record. I also grabbed the largest kitchen knife I owned and tucked it into my coat. It wasn't much, but it made me feel marginally less helpless. The docks were darker than the night before, the street lamp casting only a feeble glow across the wet pavement. I parked in the same spot, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I scanned the area for movement. At first it seemed deserted, then I saw them. Not one but two figures emerged from the shadows. Both were dressed in dark coats, their faces obscured by scarves and hats. One carried a briefcase identical to mine, while the other held what looked like a tablet. I stepped out of my car, the briefcase in hand, my pulse pounding in my ears. "I brought what you wanted," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. The figure with the tablet stepped forward. "Good," they said, their voice modulated, distorted as if filtered through a voice changer. "Set it down." I hesitated. "Not until I know what this is about. Who are you people? Why me?" The figure with the briefcase let out a low chuckle. "You're in no position to ask questions, Chambers," they said, their voice smooth and confident. "You're here to follow instructions, nothing more." "I'm not moving another inch until I get some answers," I shot back, my voice trembling despite my attempt at defiance. The one with the tablet tilted their head. For a moment, I thought they might indulge me, but then the screen of the tablet lit up, displaying a live video feed. My stomach dropped. The screen showed my apartment, my living room, and sitting on my couch, blindfolded and tied, was Rachel. "Still want to play games?" the distorted voice asked. I felt the blood drain from my face. What do you want with her? She has nothing to do with this." "She has everything to do with this," the second figure said coldly. "She's your leverage." My mind raced. Was this a trap for Rachel all along? Had they used me to get to her? Or was she part of their scheme, playing a role in some twisted act? I couldn't tell anymore, and the uncertainty gnawed at me. "Put the briefcase down," the first figure repeated, their tone unyielding. Reluctantly, I set it on the ground and stepped back, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. The second figure retrieved it, opening it briefly to inspect the contents. They nodded in satisfaction, then exchanged a glance with their partner. "Tomorrow," the distorted voice said, "you'll receive further instructions. Don't make us remind you what's at stake." Before I could respond, they turned and disappeared into the darkness, taking both briefcases with them. I stood there, shaking, my mind a whirlwind of fear and fury. I had no idea what was inside the briefcase they'd taken, or what they planned to do with it. But one thing was clear, I was no longer just a pawn in their game. Now I was a liability. I barely made it home from the docks, my mind a tangled mess of fear and rage. The image of Rachel, blindfolded and tied, was burned into my brain. Was she truly an innocent victim in all this, or had her silence at the office been an act? Regardless, her life was now a bargaining chip, and I was running out of moves. The briefcase was gone, handed over as instructed, but its purpose still gnawed at me. What was inside those encrypted files? Why was I, of all people, chosen to deliver it? And how deep did this conspiracy go, slamming the door behind me? I paced my apartment, trying to make sense of the puzzle. Every lead felt like it ended in a wall of secrecy and shadow, and that's when I remembered the voice recorder I had hidden in my pocket during the meeting. If nothing else, it might give me something to work with. I fished it out and pressed play. The distorted voice, the chilling threats, the sound of Rachel's situation being used against me, it was all there. But as I listened closely, one phrase stood out. "You'll receive further instructions tomorrow. Don't make us remind you what's at stake." It was clear that whoever these people were, they had a plan, but they'd made one critical mistake. They had underestimated my desperation. The next morning, the further instructions arrived as promised. A manila envelope was slid under my apartment door while I was in the shower. The sound of paper scraping against the floor was enough to make my heart stop. Wrapped in a towel, I approached it cautiously, half expecting it to explode. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a list of coordinates and a time. 11:00 p.m. There was no explanation, no context, just numbers and a deadline. Alongside it was a grainy photo of Rachel still tied up, this time in a different location. The background looked industrial, maybe a warehouse or a storage facility. They wanted me to follow their orders again, but this time I wasn't walking in blind. I spent the day piecing together a plan. First, I used an online mapping tool to plug in the coordinates. Sure enough, they pointed to a remote industrial park on the outskirts of the city. The location fit the kind of place someone might hold a hostage or conduct clandestine meetings. Second, I scoured the USB drive. I couldn't crack the encrypted files, but I realized something else. The drive had a hidden metadata folder. Inside was a text file, overlooked during my initial panic. Its contents were brief but damning, a log of financial transactions tied to offshore accounts, all connected to Hargrove's company. The amounts were staggering, and the recipients were anonymous, save for one, Morena. The same name from Rachel's suspicious emails. The picture was becoming clearer. Hargrove wasn't just an embezzler, he was part of a larger network, and I had been caught in the crossfire. Rachel might have been their inside operative, or just another pawn like me. Finally, I contacted someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a private investigator named Eric Bell. We'd worked together on a tricky case a decade ago, and while we didn't part on the best of terms, he owed me a favor. "Chambers," he said when he picked up, his voice gruff. "I thought you'd fallen off the radar. What's this about?" "I need eyes at an industrial park tonight," I said, giving him the coordinates. "It's complicated." "Complicated how?" "Enough that if I don't make it out, you'll know where to start looking." There was a long pause. "You're in deep, aren't you?" "Deeper than I want to be." "I'll be there," he said, and hung up. By Mont 10, 8:30 p.m., I was parked a few blocks from the industrial park, the recorder in my pocket, my nerves fraying with each passing minute. Eric hadn't called to confirm he was in position, but I had to trust he would show up. The location was eerily quiet, the hum of distant machinery the only sound as I approached the designated coordinates. My footsteps echoed off the concrete, and the smell of oil and rust hung heavy in the air. In the middle of the vast empty lot was a lone figure. They stood under the harsh glare of a floodlight, holding a phone to their ear. As I got closer, the phone buzzed in my pocket. I answered without speaking. "You're early," the distorted voice said. "That's good. It shows you're learning." "What do you want from me?" I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. "I've done everything you asked." The figure pointed to a nearby warehouse door. "Inside." I hesitated. "Where's Rachel?" The figure didn't respond. They simply stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. I had no choice. With every nerve screaming at me to run, I stepped through the door into the darkness. Inside was a sight that stopped me cold. Rachel was there, sitting in a chair, her hands still bound, but she wasn't alone. A second figure stood behind her, their face hidden by a mask, and on the table next to them was another briefcase. I stood frozen, the weight of their words hanging in the air. The warehouse was cold and damp, the smell of oil and mildew thick around me. Rachel sat in the chair, her blindfold removed, but her hands still bound. She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear, or was it something else? Behind her, the masked figure didn't move. The briefcase on the table sat ominously between us, its presence heavier than any words they could speak. "Sit," the distorted voice repeated, more forcefully this time. I lowered myself into the metal chair opposite Rachel, my mind racing. The speaker crackled to life again. "You've been cooperative so far, Chambers. That's good, but tonight your loyalty will truly be tested." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to sound calm. "I've done everything you asked. Just let her go." The figure behind Rachel placed a hand on her shoulder, making her flinch. The voice ignored my plea. "Open the briefcase." I hesitated but reached forward, my fingers trembling as I flipped the latches. The lid creaked open, revealing its contents. A pistol and a single folder marked "Final Phase" in bold red letters. "What is this?" I demanded, staring at the gun as if it might bite me. "A choice," the voice said simply. "Inside that folder is everything you need to destroy Stephen Hargrove. Evidence, connections. It's enough to bury him and everyone tied to his operation. We're giving you the chance to do the right thing." I looked up at Rachel. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together. She wasn't pleading with me, not with her eyes, not with her expression. She seemed resigned. "And the gun?" I asked, already fearing the answer. "That's for the loose end." The room fell silent, the hum of distant machinery the only sound as the weight of their words settled over me. I looked at Rachel, who finally broke her silence. "Don't listen to them," she said, her voice low but steady. "You don't have to do this. We can get out of this together." "Quiet!" the voice snapped through the speaker. "She's lying to you, Chambers. She's been working with us from the beginning." My heart sank as the pieces began to fall into place. The emails from Morena, the push to take the Hargrove case, the way Rachel had seemed to know more than she should. Had this all been orchestrated? Was she part of their plan or just another pawn like me? "You're lying," I said, but my voice wavered. I didn't know who I was talking to, Rachel, the masked figure, or the voice in the speaker. "Why would she be here if she was working with you?" "Because she failed," the voice replied coldly. "She got careless and now she's a liability, just like Hargrove and just like you could be." Rachel shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "They're trying to manipulate you. Don't let them win." The masked figure behind her pulled a knife from their pocket and held it to her throat, a silent warning that time was running out. "Choose," the voice demanded. "Take the evidence and complete the mission, or take the gun and eliminate the threat. Either way, this ends tonight." My mind raced, every scenario more damning than the last. If I shot Rachel, I would never know if she was truly innocent or guilty. But if I didn't, I risked my own life and the lives of countless others who might fall victim to whatever this group had planned. "Tick-tock, Chambers," the voice taunted. "Your time is running out." I picked up the gun, its weight unfamiliar and sickening in my hand. Rachel's eyes locked onto mine, pleading silently. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't have to do this." At that moment, everything slowed. The fear, the doubt, the confusion, they all melted away, replaced by a single chilling clarity. I raised the gun, but not at Rachel. Instead, I turned and fired at the masked figure behind her. The shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. The figure crumpled to the ground, their knife clattering to the floor. Rachel let out a choked sob, but I didn't stop to comfort her. I grabbed the folder from the briefcase and pulled her to her feet. "Let's go," I said, my voice sharp and urgent. We ran for the exit, my pulse pounding in my ears. I half expected to be gunned down before we made it to the car, but the warehouse remained eerily silent. We drove into the night, neither of us speaking until we were miles away. Later, in the safety of a rundown motel, I opened the folder. It contained everything they had promised, the evidence to dismantle Hargrove's empire and expose the shadowy network behind it. But it also contained something else, a list of names. At the very bottom of the list, circled in red, was mine. "Why is your name there?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing: this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Subscribe and watch the rest of the story in the next video.